Something impossible is happening in the deep freeze of outer space right now, and it is completely defying every law of physics we have ever written. An interstellar anomaly known as 3I Atlas suddenly sprouted structural, magnetic tendrils that are actively reaching out into the void. This is not a poetic exaggeration or a metaphorical description of typical space phenomena. NASA's Deep Space Network, operating through the massive antenna DSS-43, logged a telemetry stream from this object that scientists calculated has less than a 0.0001% probability of occurring naturally. We are currently observing a coherent, structurally expanding magnetic field that behaves like an artificial matrix, growing physical field lines exactly like biological roots pushing through soil. When you dive deep into the raw data, the underlying physics becomes profoundly unsettling because comets simply do not possess the capacity to behave this way. According to everything we know, comets are supposed to be primitive, dormant balls of frozen water, ancient rock, and cosmic dust left over from the formation of star systems. They do not have active internal dynamos, nor do they generate complex, reaching magnetic architectures. Yet, international space sensors confirmed that these magnetic roots are expanding outward into the vacuum with mathematical precision. Imagine a supposedly dead, frozen object located 240 million kilometers away from Earth suddenly deploying a highly localized magnetic structure that extends for thousands of kilometers directly into the emptiness of space. The level of precision required for this structural growth is mind-boggling, as the entire field is aligned within an incredibly tight margin of just 0.003 degrees of the incoming solar wind vector. Achieving that specific degree of directional alignment demands an active, highly regulated internal power source. Precision that incredibly tight requires direct control, and more restrictively, it requires clear intention. In all my years studying theoretical physics, this is exactly the kind of concrete data that shatters our most fundamental assumptions about the universe. The mathematical probability of a dormant, icy celestial body suddenly generating a directed, multi-layered, active magnetic field is exactly 1 in 4.7 billion. Those are not just incredibly rare odds. Those are functional, absolute impossibilities for any natural cometary body in existence. This is not a minor anomaly or a statistical fluke that can be swept under the rug. The implications of this event are profoundly staggering. If you were to zoom out to a true cosmic scale and watch this astonishing event unfold, it would look entirely like a living organism actively and calculatedly reacting to its harsh environment. But what strikes me as truly terrifying is the sheer speed of this deployment. The raw numbers are completely unambiguous. Within a strict 42-minute window, these exact magnetic roots extended over 33,000 kilometers into the freezing vacuum of deep space, signaling an energy shift that should be physically impossible for an object of this composition, meaning that whatever we are looking at is operating under a power source we cannot comprehend. Operating under a power source we cannot comprehend, NASA is currently mobilizing every single available asset across the globe to track this unfolding anomaly, while the European Space Agency works around the clock to independently verify the incoming stream of telemetry. This urgent mobilization is happening because everyone in the scientific community has always operated under the assumption that a comet is just a dead, wandering rock, but the incoming data strongly suggests otherwise. Before we allow ourselves to blindly speculate on the origins of this phenomenon, we must carefully and objectively examine the raw evidence. Right now, that evidence points directly to an event that completely defies our standard thermodynamic and electromagnetic models. In our recorded astronomical history, humanity has formally cataloged over 12,000 unique cometary objects, and not a single one of them has ever behaved like this. The foundational physics we rely on completely breaks down when we attempt to apply conventional, natural explanations to this occurrence. What we are witnessing out there in the dark is not a passive reaction, but a deliberate act of structural alteration. As the instruments record these shifts, we are forced to pause and realize what this actually means for our understanding of space. We are watching 3I Atlas transform before our very eyes, proving that the conventional explanation is dead and the real mystery is only just beginning. It actually gets much more terrifying when you look at the history of how this object was first identified. Let us establish precisely what we are observing based on the official discovery logs. 3I Atlas was initially classified by astronomers as a standard rogue interstellar comet that had been caught on a highly eccentric trajectory through our solar system. The initial assumption among astrophysicists was entirely simple: a dead chunk of dirty ice expelled from some distant, forgotten star system millions of years ago. However, the crucial differentiator that puzzled scientists from the very start was its abnormal density, as it was simply far too heavy for its observed physical volume. The situation escalated well beyond the boundary of any conventional scientific model when NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, specifically utilizing its highly sensitive NIRCam instrument, detected the initial structural disruption. The readings indicated a sudden, intense, localized thermal spike in the freezing vacuum immediately surrounding the object. NASA detected this anomaly using advanced infrared spectroscopy, and within hours, the European Space Agency independently verified this exact thermal signature using the Gaia spacecraft's astrometric arrays. To ensure absolute certainty, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, located high in the mountains of Chile, cross-referenced the emissions using its advanced Band 7 receivers and found the exact same result, solidifying the terrifying reality. Solidifying the terrifying reality, we have three independent sources utilizing completely different methodologies, arriving at an identical conclusion. The numbers are completely definitive, showing that a localized, structured magnetic field was being actively generated from deep within the core of 3I Atlas. When I first saw these numbers processing through the databases, I had to verify them twice just to believe what I was looking at, and the global consensus is shifting rapidly. First, the unexplained thermal spike occurred, and then, precisely 48 hours later, the magnetic field lines began to physically manifest into space. Now, those same tendrils are actively interacting with the solar wind, with each observed action becoming more impossible than the last. That baseline disruption was just the first anomaly. Soon after, the second anomaly appeared and sent shockwaves through the research community as the magnetic tendrils began to pulse. The primary magnetic root emitted a highly synchronous electromagnetic fluctuation. The recorded frequency was precisely 4.16 Hz, representing a rhythmic, oscillating pulse radiating outward from an object that should be completely frozen solid. Let that reality sink in for a moment. A dead, natural comet does not pulse with mathematical regularity. Now, here is what makes this truly fascinating and deeply concerning for researchers. The known physics of our universe breaks down completely when you try to model a naturally occurring internal dynamo inside a small, icy body. Earth generates its protective magnetic field because it possesses a massive, spinning core of molten iron, but 3I Atlas is roughly only 3 kilometers wide and registers an internal temperature nearing absolute zero. Yet, despite these physical limitations, the data shows a stable magnetic field strength of 87.63 microteslas. That is a flat-out statistical impossibility for a frozen rock floating in the void. The probability of this occurring naturally is functionally zero, and to put it in simpler terms, it is like a small floating iceberg suddenly generating enough electricity to power a major modern city. The massive amount of energy required to project these magnetic tendrils simply should not exist within the physical boundaries of this object. But the numbers do not lie, and NASA officially confirmed this massive energy output. That, however, was just the beginning of the transformation. The behavioral pattern changed again when Hubble's Wide Field Camera 3 captured clear visual distortions around the comet's coma, revealing that the magnetic field lines were no longer just expanding randomly into space, but preparing for something structured. Preparing for something structured, they were actively weaving themselves together, forming a helical pattern extending outward like a massive, deliberate net. When you look closely at this specific data point, you realize that the tendrils are maintaining a rigid structural integrity against a harsh solar wind traveling at 400 kilometers per second. To maintain a perfect shape against that kind of constant cosmic pressure requires a continuous, calculated output of massive energy. Imagine standing in the absolute center of a Category 5 hurricane and successfully holding a perfectly straight line of fragile silk in the air without it bending. That is exactly what 3I Atlas is doing right now in the vacuum of space. Even the most skeptical astrophysicists in the world now admit this data thoroughly defies all our standard mathematical models. The conventional explanation being floated by conservative circles is that a subsurface pocket of exotic, volatile materials is undergoing a rapid, violent phase transition. But what if our fundamental model of the cosmos is entirely incomplete? And what if we are actually looking at something else entirely? The sheer physical precision of this phenomenon is absolutely remarkable. Every single primary tendril is spaced exactly 12.4 degrees apart along the central axis of the object. Nature inherently loves chaos, and natural processes favor random entropy, meaning that nature simply does not produce perfect, equidistant magnetic architecture on a supposedly dead comet. 3 separate international observatories have now confirmed this exact geometric spacing, proving it is not a temporary glitch. This should not be physically possible under any known framework, but it is actively happening right now. What comes next is fundamentally much more shocking. The Hubble Space Telescope detected a massive, sudden spike in the overall magnetic flux density. This development was not present in any theoretical models, nor was it predicted by a single computer simulation. This single event changes everything we thought we knew about cometary physics. The science here is intriguing because, from a purely astrophysical perspective, generating a magnetic field naturally requires 3 distinct elements. You absolutely need a large volume of electrically conducting fluid, you need kinetic energy derived from rapid planetary rotation, and you need a powerful internal heat source to drive convection. Earth has a liquid iron core spinning at immense speeds to achieve this, but a dead comet like 3I Atlas is essentially just a dirty snowball stuck in a deep freeze, completely lacking the baseline requirements. Completely lacking the baseline requirements for a magnetic dynamo, it is currently projecting a field structure more complex than the planet Jupiter. When you look at this from a theoretical standpoint, it completely rewrites our textbooks. Think about that for a moment and consider how heavily this defies our standard thermodynamic models. Imagine taking a solid block of ice, throwing it into the freezing darkness of deep space, and watching it suddenly light up like a massive, powerful electromagnet. That is the sheer absurdity of what we are witnessing with our instruments. The data shifted yet again when the James Webb Space Telescope recorded the tendrils twisting themselves into a distinct double helix formation. A double helix on a space rock seems entirely impossible, but it has now been confirmed 3 separate times by different teams. The raw telemetry coming from NASA's Deep Space Network is unequivocal. The physical measurements show the magnetic roots extending a staggering 47,000 kilometers from the nucleus, perfectly aligned with the celestial equator. Let me quantify this staggering reality so we can understand the scale. The probability of a frozen cometary body retaining residual magnetism from the early formation of the solar system is perhaps 0.17% at best. The probability of that residual magnetism suddenly activating itself and structuring itself into equidistant helical tendrils reaching directly toward the solar wind is exactly 0%. Having both of these independent anomalies occur in the exact same, supposedly dead interstellar object means you would have better odds of winning the global lottery every single day for the next 10,000 years straight. That is a definitive mathematical impossibility for a natural celestial body. In 4 million years of collective cometary observation, encompassing over 12,000 cataloged objects, humanity has never seen this specific combination of thermal and electromagnetic anomalies. The numbers are entirely definitive and unassailable. A localized magnetic field of 87.63 microteslas simply cannot exist in a body with a core temperature sitting at just 20 degrees above absolute zero. When you examine the data, the energy deficit is simply colossal. as the object is producing gigawatts of magnetic energy with absolutely no visible internal or external power source. Picture this scenario clearly in your mind. If you could strip away the darkness of space and visualize the magnetic spectrum with your own eyes, 3i Atlas would look like a massive, glowing, mechanical spiderweb actively casting its glowing threads directly into the solar wind, changing the environment around it. Every single thread is perfectly tuned to interact with specific charged particles, demonstrating a level of precision that is absolutely remarkable. In simpler terms, it is functioning exactly like an enormous electromagnetic net deliberately cast out to catch something specific in the void. Pause here for a brief moment and really consider the massive implications of what we are dealing with. Even the director of the European Space Agency, an elite astrophysicist who has spent 30 years studying rogue celestial bodies, stated on the official record that this behavior strongly resembles an engineered deployment rather than a natural outgassing event. When someone at that elite level of global science makes a statement that profound, we need to pay very close attention to what is happening. When an institution like the Jet Propulsion Laboratory initiates emergency, classified data sharing protocols with international observatories, the entire paradigm has shifted. We are no longer observing a simple, passive comet passing through our neighborhood. We are observing an active, unfolding event, and the question we need to ask is not just how this is happening, but why this is happening right now. Why is this interstellar object deploying a massive, structured magnetic net at the exact moment it approaches our inner solar system? The Atacama Large Millimeter Array captured the most perplexing and terrifying data point yet. The internal temperature of the comet remained completely stable and frozen, while the external magnetic output simultaneously increased by a factor of 400. To achieve that massive spike in power without melting the fragile ice core completely violates the second law of thermodynamics. It is physically impossible under our current understanding of energy. The physics breaks down so completely here that researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology are already proposing exotic new models of dark matter interaction just to avoid the terrifying conclusions staring them in the face. Nature simply does not build flawless, rigid, zero-point energy systems out of nowhere. But what if our standard model of reality is entirely incomplete? Everyone blindly assumes this must be a natural phenomenon that we just do not understand yet, but the data strongly suggests otherwise. Right now, the clock is running out. The magnetic tendrils suddenly stopped expanding outward into space. Instead, they locked firmly into position, forming a rigid, mathematically perfect grid spanning 47,000 kilometers of empty space. They completely stabilized themselves, anchoring their structure against the solar wind with a structural tolerance of exactly 0.01%. This type of behavior should not exist in nature, as a natural magnetic field constantly fluctuates, dances with the solar wind, and bends under pressure. These roots did not bend at all. They locked in place. 3 independent sources validated this sudden, unnatural rigidity. NASA's Parker Solar Probe detected the precise moment the field stabilized, and the ESA Solar Orbiter independently verified the structural lock using a completely different methodology, yielding an identical conclusion. To stay updated as this unprecedented deep space event unfolds, and to get the latest breakdowns of the classified telemetry data as it drops, make sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments below on what you think is truly hidden inside 3i Atlas.